Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Insights Show. And today we are doing Full Circle with Tessa Dooms, and I am really glad to be hosting you this morning. The Full Circle Show is a politics show. It's a show that looks at what are the current issues that are important in South Africa today for understanding not only our politics and the parties and the systems and the institutions, but also what the social issues are that drive our politics and should drive the way in which we build our democracy into the future. We're really excited as Ravonia Circle to be in a partnership with the Insights Show, where every month we'll bring you a few shows that will really focus in and bring you some people who will help us unpack the politics of the day, the democracy of the day, and where our country should be headed and how you can be a part of that. So this morning we have a very, very interesting show, and I'm very excited to have a guest that I've known only, by seeing for a long time and hearing of from a long time, Reverend Frank Chikane. And recently, in the last few years, I've had the opportunity to work with Reverend Frank Chikane, and so it is a privilege to have him here today. It is not often that we get to talk to people who've seen so much of our country's history unfold and has been a part of some of the best moments in our country's history and have had the opportunity to be part of some of the worst moments in our country's history. And so today, I'm really looking forward to a conversation in the next hour that will help us think through the connections between the past and the present, but more importantly, to think about what our future could be and what we learn from the past and what we learn from our present struggles for building the kind of South Africa we want and building a strong democracy where all of us are stakeholders in that democracy. So I'm really, really privileged to be sitting across from you, Reverend Chikane. In this context, you were saying earlier that this is I have you at my mercy.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to your listeners as well, and those who are watching. But indeed, I'm at your mercy. That's it's not a comfortable feeling. Yeah?
But this is a very, very comfortable place.
Yeah, perfect.
No, this is an informal chat. It's a very the audience and everyone listening and watching is really here because we want to have conversations that matter in this country and that are going to get us to the next level. And so this morning we're going to be talking about people's power. And I know that this is something that you're very passionate about and have been throughout your life as an activist. When the team were asking me, what do we put as the Reverend's title? Yeah. I said activist. Just put activist. Because I think that's the thing that for me describes you best. You're somebody who stands up, who takes action, who decides to take change into your own hands and encourages others to do the same and enables that. So I wanted us to start a little bit in history rather than in the present time, and particularly the era of the 1980s in the country. In the past, on this platform and others, people have spoken about what brought us to democracy and what brought us to freedom, and whether we've met those aspirations that were fought for. But sometimes we don't think about what that fighting meant and what galvanized people, what brought people together, and what it looked like and felt like in the 80s towards, I think, a very important moment of reform and change in our country. And then we can talk later on about where we are now. But from your experience, what do you think were the things in particularly the 1970s and 80s that started to drive change in the country, especially through the lens of communities and churches and organizers? What picture could you paint for us about that time in our country's history?
Well, I'm going to try to build that. It's difficult because it's a very long history. But I must start from now and go backwards. I'm going to say that period of the 70s into the 80s was one of the most painful in this country. There were experiences in the past, but we started with June 16, and lots of kids got killed, and I'm talking about high school kids. I did, we did certain things at schools to my generation and accepted them as a reality. But the younger ones stood up and said, no, we're not going to allow this to happen. And I dealt with lots of pain. I was a pastor already at that time. Lots of pain, detained people, tortured people, people who needed medical attention, people who needed psychiatric, psychological attention, whilst you are also on the run, because you were also a target. So most people don't know. On June 16, after it had happened, we couldn't sleep at home. I couldn't either as a pastor. And we had not arranged for underground hideouts because it happened without notice. And we decided on the spur of the moment that evening that all of us are going to sleep in wrong places. So I go to your home and you go to my home. And when the police arrive, they look for me. They don't find me, but there's another character who's here, who's hiding there. That was the only way we avoided arrest the first night. And so that gives you a picture. And thereafter, the older generation had to come in, work with the younger generation. That's why you ended up with a committee of 10 in Soweto. You ended up with civic associations, etc., throughout the country. I just want to take it fast forward to the 80s. By the time we arrived in the 80s, apartheid, the regime was so brutal that you couldn't stand outside. Nobody, even criminals, became conscious of it. There's a time when we had street committees, we called for boycotts, we just did not cooperate with the apartheid system or pay anything, including rentals. That's why we have problems today, But we took a stand, and crime disappeared in Soweto. Even the criminals began to say, no, we must go and steal in town, not here. You know what I'm talking about?
Right.
It's a terrible thing to do, because they ended up stealing my wife's car. And when she appeared at Mondio police station, this guy said, I didn't know it's the Reverend's car. You must
keep your car in Soweto so we don't steal it.
Yeah. But I'm giving you the level of consciousness, even at the level of ordinary criminals who are aware that this apartheid system is bad. And so lots of people died in the 80s. Lots of us were detained. In my life between 77 and 1985, I was detained 5 times, tortured extremely, third-degree method, as we call them, when they don't care whether you die or not. It's third-degree methods. We went through that. I went through poisoning, because once I became General Secretary of the Council of Churches, they couldn't detain me. And so what they then would do is to use extrajudicial methods, including poisoning, and that story is in my book, so I don't have to talk about it. But the point is that it reached that level of conflict. But we decided we're going to stop it at all costs. And by the late 80s, it became clear to the regime they couldn't sustain this.
Viv, I actually was struck by the fact that when you spoke about June 16, you made this kind of generational distinction. Where you said it was the people who were younger than you who kind of spurred older people to say, actually, this is unsustainable. This can't happen and it can't work. I'm trying to imagine those power dynamics. Was it just that young people organized themselves and said, whether you join us or not, we're going to do this? Or was there an intergenerational conversation that started to build between different generations of activists and people that said, we all need to start working together? What did that building of people's power look like?
No, you would have to take it a little bit backwards to the 60s, where the liberation movements were banned. And our parents got completely silent for 10 years. When I grew up, I was 12 or so, when all these liberation movements were banned, and we had no possibility of knowing the details. until I arrived at the high school, and then we became conscious of what was happening. I don't have time to talk about that. Then university. That's when I read about Mandela and his treason trial, and in the black universities, you didn't have das Kapital. It was in adverts, but not in the black universities. So you took time before you reached even reading about Marx. But nevertheless, we reached that stage from a Christian perspective. I had to do papers like Christianity and Black Consciousness, Black Theology. We ourselves had to conscientize ourselves rather than depend on my parents.
Right.
My parents would be stopping me from what I was doing in a sense. But between then and 1976, for instance, those children of 1976 were reacting to Afrikaans, which I learned later that there are more oppressed people who used Afrikaans than, in the communities. But at that point, they imposed on us Rekenkende, Veskende, and I was doing my mathematics and arithmetic in Afrikaans, and I had never spoken the language. It was never spoken at home. It was imposed on us. So it's my generation when they imposed it. But when these kids came, they said, no, we're not going to learn in Afrikaans. That's the type of dynamic, but we were involved in the struggle. So there was a generation that went to prison by 1975, 1974, and I could mention all the names. So it doesn't mean it was a vacuum. But the children took a radical position and said, we're not going to allow this. And indeed, we lost 600 plus kids during that period for about 6 months. That was tragic. But nevertheless, they turned the needle. They changed even the liberation movements because they went into exile, and the liberation movements had to change and refocus on the struggle. So in a sense, the younger generation did that. I just want to say, most people think it's the 50s and the 60s and 70s who should solve our problem. And I keep on saying, by the way, when I went to detention for the first time, I was 27. And when Bishop Mpumlwana, whom you would know, was the youngest banned person in this country, he was 21 when he got subjected to banning orders. So our last born son, brother in my family, Khotso, was 15 when he got involved with COSAS, and he ended up being leader of COSAS, I think, around 16. Now, that tells you that the level of repression sort of pushed out younger people who were going to take on the system. And that's what, for me, there's a vacuum today because you don't see much of that. And of course, my son would say, no, Dad, you faced a different type of situation. Our situation was like a war zone. And so we can't compare it with today. But I'm sure younger people know what to do better than older people can, even today.
No, and I think there are parallels. I think the banning of liberation, or at least political parties particularly, and liberation movements, there is a parallel today to where we find ourselves with political parties, where although they're not banned, they're not necessarily active in our communities. They're not necessarily the drivers of activism and the drivers of change. And you get a sense that people feel like the political parties have been co-opted by the system. And so they're not necessarily representatives of the people. They're not necessarily as radical as people would like them to be, as active as people would want them to be. And so perhaps there is that kind of vacuum that's been created in a similar way, where the need for activism that's going to change things dramatically is going to need to come not from people who have just accepted the system, but from people who are going to challenge the system dramatically.
I think the mistake that was made, and we have not talked about this, is that during the UDF days in the 80s, we organized community by community. There were civic associations, there were street committees. At my street in Prepimville, the family at the corner entrance of that street would know how many cars went past there. And if there was a car that slowed down next to my house, when I come back in the evening, they will tell me there was a car that came through, slowed down, and moved. There was consciousness at that level. But I think when the liberation movements were unbanned, that model changed, and that has not been discussed. That model changed where the parties of liberation movements then went into a branch concept, and they say a branch of 100 people is a branch. You just have to be 100, you are a branch. But the branch, it's no more representing the community.
Right.
And it's not elected amongst the community. It's 100 people who come together and say, and then that branch then gets used for contesting power within the structures of the party rather than in the community. And if you are not amongst the 100, you can't be part of the leadership. But within the community, there are more credible people than the 100 people in a branch.
Right.
So there's a contradiction, and that's why that gap then got created. And I think we stand to regret that that was allowed to happen.
Because it became of this focus then on party politics, I presume.
Yeah.
So it becomes about the party and the party structure and the party's ways of doing.
Power and then corruption and, and then privilege. Right. I have to be amongst the 100 to be privileged to get a job.
Right.
I have to be amongst the 100 to be an MEC to dish up tenders. The business people then come
Patronage.
and bribe people to make sure you get voted too. So when you get it, then you must serve the interests of those business people. And so then it went further than that. And KwaZulu-Natal, it's classical, where the criminal underworld then plugged in there. Because you still have to explain how the billions, just take the Guptas alone, how the billions left the country. I mean, the bank, my bank, Standard Bank, if I get $2,000 for a, gratuity for speaking in a meeting in Germany, they call me, they check, what was it for, etc. And the other guys send out billions and nobody picks it up. That tells you the underworld plugged in and the banks got compromised. And therefore, the younger people, as would put it in that way, then get left outside this game. And I think that's where you come in, that indeed the younger people need to close that gap and make sure that there's no vacuum.
No, I think we've the issue of younger people is certainly one that I want us to get back to a little bit later.
Yeah.
But I wanted just to focus in on this question of that shift from a community and civics-centered approach to politics to a party approach to politics. My friend Lukwanamguni, who you know well, makes a point about the politics of our country today being very monopolized, not only by the ANC as a party, but by the ANC's way of doing politics. So now you have all parties that are coming up, organize themselves in the ways that, the big parties do, the traditional parties, the ANC, the IFP, and they've set a tone for what it means to be a political party and how politics is played and how politics is done, and that there might be a need for that dominance, not necessarily only of the ANC, but of that entire way of doing politics to be done away with. I mean, I think for my part, I realized very late in my own political consciousness that this is not the only way to have a political party. When I went to the US for the first time, I realized the Republicans aren't really a party. That's a very loose association of people. There's no branches. There's no, processes of regional conferences. And there are different ways in which we can structure our politics. Thinking about what happened this week in the UK, where because of the way the politics is structured, a prime minister could literally be forced to resign, not because his party just said so, but because society put pressure and were able to force politicians in a particular direction. And I'm wondering what you think about the changes that we need in our political system is there a new kind of politics and a new way to arrange ourselves politically that is necessary and can take us a little bit back towards that community-centered politics?
Well, I always say to people that there are no perfect models. All the models would have their weaknesses. In my research, in my studies, because I was in the natural sciences before, you would say, let's imagine there's a vacuum. And then we create a mathematical formula based on the vacuum. And then you say, let the air come in. The formula must change. You know what I'm saying? And adjust to reality. Now, I would say, if you take the ANC as ANC, what they were trying to do is to make sure they have a presence in every community. Right. And it's the only party in this country that has a branch in every ward. Gotcha. No other party has got that. And that was meant to actualize the democratic processes, that the branch would have been a branch that represents the people in that community. That's what was envisioned. But unfortunately, reality, when the air came in, reality changes. So I would say to you that I don't think there is you could say, this is less democratic than the United States. The problem with the United States is that it's money that dictates. People are individuals more than collective. They don't act as a collective, and they vote as individuals much more than as... They vote for a party because they prefer it for today and not for tomorrow. So I'm not sure that you could compare the two. I think we should develop our own, which is based on people's participation. That's now my view. People's participation on the ground, which is what we tried to do during the UDF days. But remember, it was because of the security situation that we did what we did. People understood why they must have a street committee. That's why crime disappeared, because if you have a street committee, nobody is going to go in there and commit crimes. And if you do it in every street, then there were people who secured me. I didn't even have to know them. They patrolled during the night to make sure I'm safe. And they did it all over the country. So it's a war situation that got us to do that. I think once the war went away, we thought we were creating democracy, but the corruption, the greed intervened. So it doesn't matter for me which party you bring in today. You will end up there unless the human beings themselves change in terms of their thinking, their values, ethics, and etc. But let's go for participation, and that's what the Defend Our Democracy, and I know you want to talk about those the current things later, but that's what Defend Our Democracy is about now. We want to take away the power into the hands of the people rather than leave them with party bosses. That's why there's a debate about the electoral system, to make sure the party bosses don't dictate what the parliamentarians do, because you collapse people's parliament to a party.
Yeah.
And therefore, they are not representing the people there, they represent the interests of the bosses. We need to de-link that so that when we elect you to go to parliament, you are there for us. And if you don't serve us, you won't be in next time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what worked in the UK last week.
Yeah.
Was as much as somebody is there in their Conservative seat, because they're a Conservative Party member, they're not just a representative of the party.
Yeah,
they also have
the people.
Yeah.
That's why they resigned. They started resigning because they are not beholden to the Prime Minister. They worry about their constituency, that if they support this Prime Minister, they're going to lose an election. I would rather resign now from Parliament and keep the constituency and ready for an election next time and go back to Parliament. That's the constituency system. Now we went proportional representation, and I would like to say we shouldn't think like it was not necessary, because some people think it was stupid to do it. I got involved in that debate. We didn't have it during the liberation struggle. It came to in the early 90s as we were negotiating, and it became clear that if we did constituency system, the minority parties would go, the whites would not even feature, because, we are in the majority. And therefore, we went proportional representation to make sure everybody is represented. If you've got 100,000 people who vote for you, you will sit in parliament. But if we go constituency setting, you won't. So that's the point we're trying to solve. And that Slabat was put on a commission and said, we must change this thing. We have a model at the local government level, which is proportional representation and constituency. It's not working properly. I think we need changes. And we have served the purpose of proportional representation to take care of minorities. Now we must debate. That's why I'm saying there's no perfect system. We must debate what to lose and what to gain. And if you want to stop the control of the bosses that took us to state capture, then you need to change the proportional representation system.
No, and I think the electoral system is a big part of the question about political reform and political change, and how you get people more involved. At the moment, we're dealing with the electoral bill, amendment bill that's in Parliament, and that was brought in by the First Nation group who took this to court and won the judgment for independent candidates to contest in 2024. So it takes us a little step forward in the conversation, because now you have the opportunity for an independent who doesn't represent a party or a party boss to be there. But we also know that the bill that's on the table at the moment does not meet, muster in any way, really. It doesn't seem to be a bill that's very well thought through. It doesn't seem to be a bill that is fair. And giving independents a fair shot to actually contest. And I'm wondering, between now and December, because Parliament has gotten the judgment that they can now have the extension till December. What should we be doing in society to try and get this debate to a better level and get that bill in a better condition, so we don't end up with a bill and an electoral system that in name only allows more participation, but actually just furthers the interest of big parties?
Yeah, but I mean, the same parliament has to make that decision, which is unfortunate.
Can't get turkeys to vote for Christmas.
No, let me say, I'm excited that we held the conference on democratic renewal and change. And the outcome thereof says in a declaration, we need to deal with these matters. So we have now, in the Secretariat of the DOD, agreed we're going to have a specialized task team that brings all the groups that deal with electoral issues, and we're going to convene urgently. We're going to look at what makes sense for the people, to empower the people. We want to take the power into the hands of the people. And what can we do between now and December to intervene in this process, and what are the long-term issues? Because there will be short-term issues and long-term issues. We are working on that, and you will see, I mean, the DOD's usefulness is the power of convening. It can convene people without people becoming suspicious. You know what I'm talking? We're not talking about party. We're talking about the people of South Africa. So I'm looking forward to an urgent specialized task team. By the way, it's the same with ESCOM. We have taken ESCOM and power as a crisis in this country. We're going to have a specialized team. We're going to make sure that anybody who's a beneficiary who makes ESCOM not to deliver what it should deliver will get out of the way. It's the people who must make that decision. The politicians won't be able to make it because they are interest groups. And that's the same with electoral system.
And the next thing I want us to talk about is
Yeah.
how do people get involved in these kinds of initiatives.
Yeah.
But I also just want to remind people that we are live. And so if you do have comments that you want to share with us, please make sure that you type into the comment box. Make sure that you subscribe, that you like. The channel has, of course, many offerings in different shows. And today we are talking about people's power with Reverend Frank Chikane on Full Circle. And the question about people's power is about political participation by everyone. Political participation by different groups of people, different communities of people. And we're going to talk a bit about how we make this practical. How do we make sure that if you are sitting and you're thinking about how do I participate politically? I'm not part of a party. I've never had a desire to follow politics, but I recognize that I'm part of this country and I want to get involved. What does that look like? And I think that's where we need to take this conversation now is how do we start building people's power? Maybe a first question to ask is, when we say people's power, what do you mean by that? What do we mean?
Well, you know, when we formed the DOD more than a year ago, it's me who said, Parliament has failed us, the parties have failed us, Parliament has failed us. The people are the last line of defense. So, and then we came together to mobilize the people. Now the question is, how do you reach out to all the people? In the past, because it was a war zone in the country, people were mobilized by reacting to the war. And it was easy to get them into structures and organize them. Today, people relaxed actually and left power to the politicians and hoped they were going to solve their problem, and they didn't. And that's why now we have the crisis we have with state capture. We've got ESCOM and no electricity, water. And what we need now is to organize people sector by sector, community by community. And I'm saying sector because others won't work within a community, but are in the particular community. And that's why the decision of the Conference on Democratic Renewal and Change says we need a movement of the people. And we're going to visit every province and we'll go as far as regions to talk to people. Now that's where you come in, because you use social media systems, communication systems, that will not be reached by holding a meeting in Durban. You know, there are people who won't go to a meeting, but they will listen to you. And that's why we must use all media forms to mobilize people in the way they understand best. Now, I'm older, and the new methods, the old methods may not work. And so I'm expecting that the younger generation will develop new methods of mobilizing people and structures. They don't want to be too structured. I want a command system, because if I'm in a war, I want a command system. They want a loose system, and I'm happy to see how it works. The way it will work, it's how we stop the criminals governing us by 2024. The way it will work is to make sure that all these people who stole money from the people go to jail. Because we can't, some say give them amnesty. I say if they repent, I can consider that. But if they're still continuing to rip off the country, no, we need to stop it. That's my point. Yeah.
So, Rev, you and I have had some difficult conversations on this issue. Yeah. And one of them has been about the ANC itself, right? So I think I've asked, and people have asked, why not just, if the ANC is in power right now, why not just from the inside of the ANC fix these things and, everything will be sorted out? And is it not just, bringing society together because the ANC, needs to be pushed in particular directions, and we're just going to try and placate society to push the ANC in a nice direction? Is this about kind of factional wars in the ANC that we're trying to solve from the outside in? Is this not just something that we can go and do in the ANC where the question of who the criminals are and state capture. The ANC is so complicit. Why not just say, fix the ANC and everything's fine?
Well, it's not as easy as that. You know that.
No,
let me just say, for people who have not been in the ANC, who have no responsibility within the ANC, can think freely about what else they need to do. But by 2015, I and veterans of the African National Congress decided no noise from civil society will stop this machine. It's grinding, it's going to destroy this country. And the only people who will stop, people in the ANC who are using the ANC for this purpose, it's veterans of that movement. And that's why we mobilized the veterans. And I remember going to sit with the NEC of the ANC, 45 veterans, and about 60 or so members of the NEC sitting on one side. And these veterans came in crutches, in wheelchairs and sticks to come and say, you can't do this. And that's why between 2015 and 2017, it unraveled. That's why you have got the commission. That's why you've got whatever is happening at the present moment. So there is a role for those who are there, who are part of that history, to stop this. And they will talk about renewal. The Veterans League is working on a renewal program to renew this thing. But of course, if the criminals captured it, let's say December comes and the criminals become your leaders of the ANC, obviously, some of us will say, no, we're not going to support this thing because it's no more what the ANC is about. And I think that's critical, but that's a debate within, and that those who are part of that history have a responsibility to stop the killer machine. But those who are outside, they would say, no, but we need to organize ourselves against this thing. And it's their right to do that. And so I've chosen that I have a responsibility within, and I'm not going to walk away so easily and let the criminals control that machine. That machine is huge. When you have an election, there are 70 volunteers in each ward. It's a huge machine, and you're not going to let the criminals take it over and use it against the people. But at the same time, I believe that we need to work with the community. That's why I'm part of DOD, because it's with the people, and the declaration is clear. It's not about party. It's about the people, and that's where I belong. And so it depends on who you are. If you have never been with the ANC before, you don't even have to worry about the ANC because you have no role in any way to play there.
No, and I think I've often said to people, when I talk to people who are in the ANC, who've been in the ANC, I always say to them, I think you have a harder task than the rest of us because you have to choose between saving the country and saving the ANC. You're always having to make that choice. For me, as somebody who's never been part of the ANC or any political party, and I think even other people in other political parties have to make those considerations. We only have to think about, do we save the country or the country?
No. That's why the ANC, some ANC people don't like me. I'm saying the ANC was not an end in itself. It was about liberating the people of South Africa, and it did a good job. I am not in the game of saving the ANC to continue messing up with the country. No. I'm in a game of, if I save the ANC, save the country. If I can't save the ANC to save the country, then I must save the country, not the ANC. So I think it's important to understand that I'm not eternally beholden to a party. I'm eternally beholden to the cause of justice for the people of South Africa. And that's what got me, by the way, into politics. It was my faith and about justice. I wasn't born in the ANC. There was nobody in the Chikanes who was a member of the ANC before I became part of it. And my brothers and sisters, of course, followed. But the point is, it's not the party that's life and death. It is whether or not the party is part of the solution or part of the problem. And they need to make the choice.
Right.
And that's why I said, if you choose to be part of the problem, you will lose an election. And I said so in 2015, 2016. I talked about metros. I said, you're going to lose the metros. And they lost them. And so 2024, it depends on what happens in December. If they decide the criminals are their leaders, that's the end of the game.
I mean, you've made me think about a conversation I think we need to have on this platform, which is my contestation around criminals and incompetence.
Yeah.
But that's a different conversation about the ANC itself. But I think it's an important point that you make, that really it's the country that's victory or death. It's the country that we must fight for. And any political party structure, all of that, if it's having its own internal issues, I mean, people will say the DA is, I can't remember now, his name escapes me. But it was somebody who said that the DA is self-mutilating in a corner unprovoked.
Yeah.
I mean, people in the DA will tell you, we're tired of having to fight these internal DA battles, and we're trying to have, to scratch around for power here and power there when the country burns. And I think that is part of the moment that we're in. And when we talk about people's participation, for the most part, if you've been born into, and we talk about the young people, if you've been born into a democratic South Africa, for the most part, we have limited political participation to the vote. And we have seen that particularly young people are rejecting that. I think more than young people, because we have only a third of voters who are eligible who are actually turning out now. So people are saying, this thing is not working. This vote thing is not working. A young man said to us when we were doing our democracy builder work in Ulundi, he said, everyone gets a vote. We get a vote. But people out there get the democracy. The people with power get democracy.
Yeah.
We just get a vote. And so we don't feel like this vote is sufficient. It's not enough. And so we've rejected it. We're not going to show up for it because it's meaningless to us.
Yeah.
And I think part of what you're calling for is, when you say people's power and participation, is not just voting. I would assume we're talking about a lot more than saying people must show up to vote. But what are some of the practical ways that people can start participating politically and participating outside of feeling beholden to a party or simply just putting an X?
Well, it's a chicken and an egg situation. If you boycott it, any other person can take that power and use it. Yeah, and by the way, I don't believe that it's just one power party that's a problem. There are huge risks of alternatives. You could end up being with a demagogue of a leader who's going to be a dictator. Remember that Hitler was legitimately elected because the Germans were aggrieved about the First World War and the conditions that world put on them. And Hitler came and said, I can solve your problem, and produced what happened in the World War II. And the Japanese just happened to be on the wrong side, and they paid with a nuclear bomb, which is unfortunate. But the point I want to make is the choice is very difficult. If you say, I'm not going to vote, in 2024, some demagogue will take over. We need to stop that. So how do we do it? My view is we must mobilize the people, community by community, sector by sector, to close the gap and make sure that the politicians would know that if they don't serve that community, they will not be in power. But it's not only that, to force them to change. If they don't change, then people must build their own alternative models of taking up the power. I don't believe in a vacuum. My training was
Never vacuum.
even straight, not just science, but even straightforward revolutionary theory. It says you can't leave a vacuum. You can't have people in Soweto going back to Pramastovs and Mbaulas because there's no power. And
That's
you
true.
leave it to other people and say, I don't have to do anything about it. Then you're going to produce demagogues who are going to use that and become dictators. So the model I'm talking about it's between now and 2024. You need to mobilize the masses so well that we should send the fear of God on the politicians. And that if they don't serve us, we can organize ourselves outside them and make sure we take that power. But you can't do that if you've not organized. They know. If you threaten them and they know, it's like, for instance, the churches. When the SACC makes a statement, because the SACC declared that government during former President Zuma morally illegitimate at a conference in 2017. That resolution still stands. It has not been reviewed because they want to see change before they change it. Now, but on the other hand, the politicians know you've got like 20 million members of the SACC churches, estimates, or more. But they know that the president of this church didn't go to the congregations and mobilize them about that resolution. So the politician will relax because they know you're not going to do it. But if they know you can mobilize the 20 plus million, then they'll stop and think. So we need to create a climate where even the most powerful will stop and think, because if you don't represent us, we will create our own formations to take you out.
And I mean, I think you spoke at the DOD conference about the People's Manifesto. So you're talking about this idea that people gather around the issues they care about, they put those issues on the table, and they tell the politicians, if this is not in your manifesto, if this is not on your agenda, if this is not what you're going to stand for, then you're not going to get votes from us.
No.
But I think it's your second provocation that's equally important. Because it's one thing for somebody to say, okay, it's in my manifesto, look, But if you don't get a sense that there's actual change that's going to come, then you're saying the people must then be prepared to raise your hand and actually go and take the power yourself.
Well, the people will. I mean, I can tell you now, if we go on this trajectory and become worse, the people will take the power. So any person who thinks must change the trajectory. Now, I don't want to go back to my historical references, but when we buried Professor Mahomet, who was a leader of the ANC and Wits mathematician, I said I come from the mathematics world, and we can measure the level of deviation of each leader of the ANC. And so we're going to draw a line and look at each leader, calculate how much you have deviated from what the ANC was about, and disqualify you. And I wanted to use a mathematical, to explain, because we are bearing a mathematician who's a comrade I worked with. And so if they deviate, and I said that in 2015, about 2016 elections, the ANC was still controlling, Johannesburg, Tshwane, PE. I said, if you don't change between now and 2016, you will lose the metros. And they lost them. And that paper I produced, 33-page document, you should go and look at it, because I put it in a document and delivered it to Letule House. And when I did that day, my wife was even worried about my security, at that point, because it was so critical. And I said, by this time, you lose a national election. And my estimation was 2024 and plus another 5. Between that, 2024, 2029, you will lose an election. So they know I have a history with the ANC. It's if, for instance, you are a Sisulu, like Sheila Sisulu said one day, you guys, you say no, but this thing looks like ANC. He says, but how do I cease to be a Sisulu? It's my history, But I'm angry about what's happening. That's the point. And so we need to make the politicians, and I use the expression fear of God. We must send the fear of God on them by organizing the people of South Africa. And my only model is that of UDF. Younger people might have a different model, but mine It's the model that could tell me if something happens in Saldanha Bay, within 2 hours, I'll have all the details about what happened there. And we work on a solution, we intervene. Today, you have the VAL staying there with sewer system running in the streets for years. And then they even bring the army. And then the army leaves without solving the problem. So who's going to solve the problem? The people there must take on this matter with the support of all of us to make sure that problem is solved. And I'm going to go to Soweto. We're going to solve this electricity problem, whether or not the government is able to do it. We must reach a stage where we are so organized that if the government fails, we'll solve the problem, and if we solve the problem, the people will not vote for that government in any way.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of talk about people saying, really, I think it was in Mafikeng, where a young person said to us, if there's anything you can do first, tell the government to leave us alone so we can build our communities. And I think we had a contestation of ideas there where I said, please don't say that, because it's your government. Yeah. It's your government. It's your
and
state.
The resources,
it's ours. Those resources are ours. Yeah. We cannot say it's their government. It's their resources. It's our resources. I make the analogy that, government is like a car that somebody is driving, and whoever the party in power is driving it. And we can't be the people just banging on the outside. It's driving towards a cliff. We're just banging on the outside because it's our car.
It's our car. We can't let it go over the cliff. Yeah.
So if it means we must remove the driver, it's fine.
Yeah.
But we certainly can't just say it's their car, because it's not their car. It's ours. And I think that the idea about organizing sometimes can be daunting to people, especially, again, of a generation where organizing has happened at very small scales. So I don't think that we don't have activism in this country. There are people who say activism is dead in South Africa. I don't believe that. I think we're a very activist country. I think people protest. I think people organize to solve issues. I think community organizers are some of the most overworked and sometimes not paid at all people in this country, in their masses, in their thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, all the time. And I think the point is around what do we organize around. And so for the DOD conference, coming up with an electoral reform agenda, very important to organize around. But I think you're also pointing to the fact that we need to figure out what the local issues are that people care about. And start to organize around them.
Yeah, and it's all of civil society and organizations. For instance, if you take the churches I have worked with, I tested a model in Naleji when I was a pastor there, and we gave it to the SACC. If that model, which is based on community to community base, you would not have the floods in KwaZulu-Natal and have a place where nobody has reached the people, because the church is within there. When we had a crisis during my time when I was General Secretary, the whole community would be closed out of the roads in KwaZulu-Natal. So these floods are just worse, but they used to happen. And we would have a pastor in there who will tell us what is happening there. And I even said we might need to command a helicopter, go and land there and help the community. This idea that a month later, people are being interviewed on TV and say, nobody has come here. But where is the church? Because the church is, the people there belong to a church. This country has got people who go to church on Sunday, every Sunday. So, which means the church is failing. So I think we must look at failure at different levels. And if we put together the capacity of the people, the business people are there. They've got shops there. You can't say nobody is there. What they mean is we are waiting for a government official from some office somewhere. No, we must take care of ourselves and demand that that official come here, even if you get on a helicopter to come where we are. I don't understand the idea that people are still trapped. I don't understand the idea that there's no bridge. The military during a war will build a bridge within hours to cross. Why can't the army be called to put up bridges and let people be? There's something wrong, radically wrong, and we need to resolve it. But without being organized, I can tell you, as individuals, that's what I said at the opening of the DOD. I said, none of us here in our own organizations can deal with this matter effectively. It's only when we put our forces together, but not only those who were there, because these are organized civil society, there were community representatives there. We need to go to each community. In Jane Fairs, where they've got a dam, the government spent billions there, but they don't have water. But the mining community gets the water from there. The farmers get water from there, but the community doesn't get water. It doesn't make sense. Why don't we go there? So my model is you partner with the community and bring people with expertise. There, I just need a water engineer, an accountant. You know what I'm talking about. A handful of volunteers, because we can't pay everybody. You need people to say, I make money in my business, but 20% of my time I'm going to give to saving the country. In my case now, 50% of my time I have to put food on the table. But the other 50% is all voluntary. Nobody pays me. Even my work with the WCC is not paying me. The point is we need professionals to team up with communities to solve the problems. And that model will make sure that no councillor, in Soweto there are about 18 councillors or so, ANC councillors. When I did the count 3 years ago. What are they doing there? We go there and say, you work with us, or if you don't want to work with us, we're going to do it in any way. That's what we need to do.
And you've covered the last thing that I do want to zero in on today, which is funding activism.
Yeah.
Because I think that one of the important things that I've become more and more alive to in my activism over the last few years is that I occupy a position of privilege. Either in terms of the spaces I'm able to go into, the powerful people I'm able to talk to, or the resources I have.
Yeah.
And we have to recognize in a country with almost 50% unemployment, that most people who want to be part of the solution don't have the luxury always of making that choice of I can spend 50% of my time getting food and 50% of my time on activism, which means there must be a call for all of us who have some access to resources to think about how we lend ourselves, our time, our talent, but also our resources to extend activism and support activism around this country, because it's not going to happen by osmosis. We need to create that space. And I think we're probably in a better position than you were during the UDF days in the 80s.
Well, I was just going to say that you have to be active to end up attracting resources. And those resources only come when those who hold them know that you have something to offer, and it will make a difference. But unfortunately, the wrong people keep the money. They have the money. Most of the right people don't have enough money to do this. And I think it's going to be a tension when we start. Those who are professionals must volunteer their time. But those who are poor, who are in those communities, must work together with the professionals. And because they don't have anything, I mean, when you call for a protest during a week on Tuesday, you see lots of people there, which means they're unemployed. So the unemployed, the poor, have to take this task in their hands to say, I'm unemployed, I'm not working, I'm going to use this time to mobilize the community and make sure we get the power and solve the problem.
And I'm going to put out a similar call to particularly young professionals and young black professionals, that it's more than their time that's going to be required. They're going to have to also say, I'm going to do a little savings kitty in my own life to support activists.
And put the money to activists.
And put it to activists. It's my generational mission to make sure people like me do that.
No, I agree with you. By the way, yesterday we decided with my dear wife, there's a struggle. I won't talk about it here. It required money. We got people to do something, but there's no funder. And yesterday we decided will pay that bill. You know what I'm talking about, from family resources.
Yeah.
But there's a limitation to that. You know, you can do it
100%.
this way and not. You need people who have got a little bit of fat in terms of money. But unfortunately, the people who have it are not seeing the problem you are seeing. So, but the young professionals are the ones who still conscious. By the way, the story about university students who are radical at the university, and when they leave and go into the economy, it's risky and they stop. But even if you can't do it because you are now a CEO of a company or a chief director somewhere, but you can put money aside and support somebody else who's going to do what you can't do because of your position.
No, I think that is a very good place for us to to end, because it's a call to action of a different kind. And I think there has been a call to action here for us to really look beyond, you know, the political system as it is, and start to ask ourselves how we get involved, both in terms of how we organize ourselves and the things we're willing to fight for, but also in terms of the resources we're willing to put aside. And I'm really grateful. We've come to the end of the conversation, but I'm so grateful for your time today.
Thank you very much. I just want to say the last thing is that what pains me most about what's happening now is the sacrifices we made and the mess people are making out of what we gained, and that pains me greatly.
And I hope that we're able to turn the tide on that and course correct in your lifetime.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to everybody who's joined us for this hour of Full Circle with Tessa Dooms. It's been an hour of really reflecting not on politics in that big man political party sense, but a politics that is individualized, that is personal, that is collective in our communities, and that really brings home that the power that politics represents must start with each and every one of us. And so I hope that you're inspired. I hope that you watch this again and think through how you can be a driver of change in your own community, in your own life, and ultimately change the future of the country. Until next time, this is Full Circle with Tessa Dooms.